Tonight, we turn our spotlight on a man who's no stranger to conflicts. Among other military accomplishments, Romeo Dallaire led the UN peacekeeping mission for Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. He's since been an outspoken advocate for peace and mental health. And Travis sat down with him to discuss Canada's military spending and our country's role in the United Nations.
And General Romeo Dallaire joins me now. Thank you so much for making the time.
Very good.
I do want to ask you about the United Nations and how much of an influence you think the United Nations has right now in the world as opposed to 30 years ago.
In fact, if you look at 30 years ago, we were just coming out of decades of an emasculated UN because the Russians kept putting the veto on everything. Then we thought that we were entering a new era where the end of the Cold War, peace dividend, and a desire to assist nations who were imploding left, right, and center. We've abdicated and handed over peacekeeping to nations that don't have the equipment, don't have the trained soldiers, nor the political capital to be able to engage.
And so how do you see the UN becoming more robust during a time that is filled with so much conflict in this world?
Well, that's a very, very perspicacious question because just the turn of the century, when Kofi Annan was the Secretary General, he had been asked, particularly by the Americans, to bring in a whole bunch of reforms, which he actually prepared. And these reforms were to be tabled in 2005, but the Americans saw that the UN would become a significant player if they implemented many of the significant reforms that were required. And because of that, they vetoed the whole damn thing. And so until nations pick up all those recommendations and do significant internal reforms, the UN will be, a reference point. Yes, will be a place where they can talk, but it will not be necessarily the place where we will find peace. We'll find truces, we'll find temporary solutions, but we will not find peace.
And so where is Canada's role in that movement back towards a more robust UN?
Hey, there you go. Where is it? Where is it? It's this country of ours that was this leading middle power with all that innovative capability, a diplomatic corps that was respected around the world, a credibility and an engagement. Where's it gone? Why have we turned so internal? Why is the external of our country, well, focused on NATO, so we've gone back to Europe. And so by going back to Europe, well, we don't seem to have any capability to doing anything else. Well, what happens in many of the countries of the world, and those countries are going to affect us. The diasporas are going to be affected. Our possibility of pandemics being spread through massive movements of refugees and refugee camps and the like. And so there is not a conflict in the world that doesn't have an impact on us. And so it really is in our self-interest to be engaged, but it doesn't seem to be able to get into the psyche of our political elites that, in fact, Canada is turned to as one of the leading middle powers in the world, and we should be squaring up to the reputation and the potential we have.
Okay, so middle power is what we were, in your opinion. What do you think we are now?
There's an expression that I keep hearing when I go around the world, and particularly in Africa. They say, oh, Canada, yes. In French, we use the term grand parleur, petit faisant, and translated is big talker but little doer. And so, yeah, we're into NATO, but still not to the extent that NATO would require. But also, we just are not engaged with the innovative leadership desire to be able to influence the world because we've lost so much ground to others. I mean, Norwegians seem to have more credibility and more impact than we do.
Let's talk about national defense in this country. You know, Canada recently announced a new pledge of $73 billion over the next 20 years toward military spending. There's this conversation going about waning recruitment for the Canadian military, equipment that, needs to, there's an equipment problem. They need to, either fix what they've got, they need to procure new equipment. This is a 20-year plan with some commitments, but not as firm as others would like to see. What's your assessment of defense spending right now, and how much of a priority this is for Canada?
Canada has moved away from keeping a defense capability that can play in a significant role beyond a NATO context where we are intertwined with other nations that have significant capabilities to be able to influence the international security and protection of civilians in many of the hotspots around the world. And so the lack of equipment, the lack of people, the needs for significant reforms in the leadership philosophies, those elements are still waning because it is not in the prioritization of what I think Canada sees itself.
Let's talk about your book for a moment, the one on the shelf behind you. You know, in the book, you talk about the impact that Rwanda had on you, the PTSD that you suffered as a result. All these years later, how do you carry that burden?
Well, apart from the pills and 25 years nearly of therapy, what really the book did, it's the fourth one in a line that moved from operational to tactical to mental health of the individual to now a strategic thinking and how do we bring lasting peace. Everything we've been working on has been essentially truces. Even right after World War II, we thought we had peace. And then boom, we're up with the Warsaw Pact and the Cold War. And so instead of a world that is trying to just make do with truces that don't have much life to them, often because the frictions are there, we must move to a communion between the planet and all of humanity for lasting peace. And that's achievable.
Do you see how, that view of the world can be hard to see right now because we are in this cycle of conflict? With so much going on in the Middle East, so much going on in Ukraine, in Sudan, elsewhere?
Well, these conflicts are going to continue as the hubris and the ego-based decision-making that exists in the political world with the lack of statesmanship that can, in fact, see reconciliation, that can anticipate some of these problems, that has the humility, but also has the strength of character and depth to be able to take risks. Until all that starts to present itself, we're going to continue to see these significant conflicts, and we're going to see the civilians paying more and more the price. However, I do believe that the younger generation and the introduction in a deliberate way of women as an equal player in all these decision institutions and bodies, they will attrit that egocentric, male-dominated philosophy of solutions into a humanity level of where human security and human beings are put in the forefront.
So that is kind of, a long-term view of the situation. I wonder, with the conflicts going on right now, the two that I mentioned, Ukraine and Middle East, how do you see that playing out, and how long do you think these conflicts are going to go on for?
On the one hand, you've got Ukraine, where Putin has used the tactical nuclear bluff to keep NATO out of Ukraine, which suited many countries because they really didn't want to go in and put their boots on the ground. And so now nuclear weapons are back in the equation. The other dimension that is still in play in the catastrophic failure that we're seeing today is generational wars. What I mean by that is then look at Gaza. Gaza has guaranteed that the youth not only in the Middle East, but around the world, are seeing a genocide ongoing. They're seeing people standing on the sidelines. They see a lot of people talking, but we see a lot of people dying and a lot of youth dying. And that generation that's living that, well, what do you think is going to happen when they become adults? And so we've created a pattern of generational wars. So I fear that we are going to be in some very complicated, even ambiguous scenarios still in the future for decades to come.
Let me just ask as a final question. You know, your book is perhaps about optimism for the world. Are you optimistic that Canada can return to, the place that you viewed this country was 30 years ago as that middle power?
Absolutely. There is no doubt in my military mind that the potential of this country, but it's going to come not necessarily from the generations that are running the show now, but it's going to come from those millennials, they're going to come from those Zeds, it's going to come from these generations without borders. They are going to show their impatience with how we're fiddling, and they will, because they're globally looking at the world, they're looking at climate, they're looking at the planet, they're looking at women, they're looking at how conflicts are being simply brushed over for a while instead of resolved, and they are going to take action. And so I see generations of activists coming up and pushing us aside.
General Romeo Dallaire with a long view back and the look forward as well. We thank you for your time here on Canada Tonight.
Yeah, very kind. Good questions.